All right, good morning. We're so excited to see you and that camera. Really excited about that.
We also recognize we are the thing standing between you all and brunch. So just please bear with us this morning. We got some exciting information that we are excited to share with you all, and hope that this is a really rewarding experience for everybody in the room.
Yeah, so obviously, hopefully you're in the right place. We're here to talk about the real talk behind being a mid-level manager. And so if this isn't what you were looking for, you're welcome to stay and talk about it anyways. And so we are going to talk with you today. We want to acknowledge that we have a third presenter who wasn't able to make it here today, but he contributed a lot to this presentation. So we wanted to acknowledge that he contributed a lot throughout the presentation. But it'll just be the two of us today.
So we're going to do some quick introductions. Hello, everybody. My name is Michael Rockford. I use pronouns he, him, and his. I currently serve as an assistant director at the University of South Florida for residential education.
And good morning. My name is Kaila Kowalski, and I use she, her pronouns. And I am at the University of Central Florida as an assistant director for residence life and education.
And as we mentioned, our co-presenter, Michael Jones, who's at Vanderbilt University, also an assistant director, was unable to join us today. But as we mentioned, we did want to give him some credit for this because he definitely contributed. So our learning outcomes today and why you're all here, and so why we felt this presentation was important is that, full disclosure, Kaila, Mike, and I have all transitioned into assistant director roles, mid-level manager roles, pretty much within the last year, year and a half. And so we are relatively new to this, and so the purpose of our presentation and why we felt this was important is for those individuals that are making that transition into these roles. And maybe you have already made the transition or you're getting ready to make the transition. We wanted to share some insights that we've learned of the benefits and the rewarding things that led us to want to pursue these roles, but then also what we've learned along the way and how we need to take care of ourselves in these roles just as much as we are encouraging our entry-level professionals and even our senior-level professionals as well. And so first, we want to talk about how to better utilize Greg McKeown's framework for Essentialism. How many people in this room have read Essentialism? It's been, okay, one hand. It's kind of been on that circuit for a while. I know it's talked about a lot at ICA, formerly RCI. It's made its rounds, but we want to bring in some elements of that just because focusing on what we need to focus on in these roles is how we make sure that we're doing what we need to do for our peers, for our staff, and for others. We'll also talk about how we apply some of the tenets of radical candor. Again, another buzzword read, but at the same time, still very much important because at the end of the day, one of the core tenets that we are doing in our roles as mid-level professionals is supervising our entry-level professionals or supervising other staff. And so we want to make sure that we're focusing on their needs as well. We'll also talk about how we understand some of the realities as it relates to the challenges and areas of growth in the mid-manager role. And then finally, at the end and also throughout this, we want to talk about bias, privilege, and identity because after all, we are standing up here and full disclosure of my own identity, I recognize I hold a lot of privileged identities. That makes it easier for me to enter some spaces than it does for some of my peers. And so how do we work through that and how do we support and also engage to make sure that we are never neglecting that conversation, but making sure that it is a part and a fundamental element of how we work with one another.
Yeah, and as Michael said a little bit too, and to jump off that, we really want this to be interactive. There's no one that's an expert on being a mid-level manager. And as we mentioned, we're both relatively new to the transition. So although you can learn a lot in a short amount of time, we do want to recognize that we've got about 50 of you around the room. And so please feel free to interact, engage. If there's something about it that you want to speak about or you just want to acknowledge it or add your own story to. For me personally, the benefit of presenting at SEAHO is creating a space where people can come together to talk about a topic. And so we really try to make this interactive. So we want you to be able to pair in smaller groups throughout the time so that you can kind of make connections that you can take beyond SEAHO, right? SEAHO all year. And so we're going to try to create opportunities for that. But if there's something that really resonates with you or you'd like to share a story about, whether it's a success or a challenge, something you're working on now, you've worked through, please feel free to share that throughout. So kind of just our overview agenda, we're going to start with expectations versus reality. That's kind of framing what we're going to talk about today. We're going to go into some task management, so understanding when there's so many roles and responsibilities, how do we effectively try to manage that? As Michael mentioned, we're going to talk about supervision, which is a primary responsibility for a lot of our roles. And then making positive changes. So we're going to talk about a lot of the realities, a lot of the expectations. How do we actually kind of talk through strategies for success in our positions on our home campuses? And then navigating spaces. We talked about navigating spaces as being something that we really want to articulate throughout our entire presentation, right? Because everything we're talking about, whether it's managing your time, managing your staff, managing yourself, your emotions, things you're working on, all have to do with who you are as a person. And so we really want to try to integrate that throughout, but we left it at the end in terms of our formal layout so we can ensure that we kind of follow through and talk through that.
Yeah. And so it's activity time, right?
Yes.
All right. So we have an activity. We're going to come back to that here in just a moment. So first, before we get to the activity, we're going to split you all up in some groups, and so having some of that dialogue and discussion. So what we'd like to do is we're going to split the rooms in half. So that half of the room, you're going to be participating in some groups, this half as well. We're going to have the front rows kind of grouped together. You'll be group number 1. Middle rows kind of grouped together, discuss, group number 2. And then the back 2 rows, you'll be kind of group number 3. We're doing this because we want to engage on a couple different levels. All right? So just keep that in mind as Kaila explains what we're going to do next.
Anyone remember this type of meme? Right? Yeah, what a throwback. So this was something that we were talking through our presentation. We spent a lot of time talking in preparation for our presentation, and we felt like there's just a lot of expectations that everybody holds about mid-level managers. And so it's kind of hard to find pictures to match, so we're going to explain a little bit. So what students think we do, often students think that we're just an administrator. We're just answering emails. We're just there to kind of make things happen, and that's all we do all day is strictly 8 hours of email. I wish I only had 8 hours of emails. That's what students think we do, what entry-level professionals think we do. Sometimes we're a great friend, a great resource, a great advocate. Other times we're bringing the realities, right? And we don't have the context, we don't have the information. That can be stressful, and that can have some of our entry-level professional staff struggling to feel like we're supporting them or the department's supporting them, right? The they in the room sometimes. And so wanting to understand, like, sometimes we're in this balancing game of being a friend or being someone who's like providing this like struggle, and so how do we balance that? Senior level professionals, we use this because we sometimes feel like, and again, these are broad generalizations, right? This is just a meme for fun. We sometimes feel like we're expected to know the nitty gritty, the details of everything in all of our areas. That's a lot of stuff in a lot of our areas. How many of you in the room supervise? Anybody? All right, now how many in the room also, in addition to supervising, have a collateral area or any other assignment in general? So literally everybody, right? So everybody has so many things they're working on, and you have your staff that you kind of trust and you work with to kind of work through those things, but sometimes it's like, well, how come you didn't know about that stain on that one bed sheet in that one room? Well, there's 7 other things. So that's why we put that one. What parents think we do, I look for a little Mr. Fix-It-All image, right? Like, you can fix my baby's everything, right? I need you to swoop in and fix all the roommate conflicts. You should be able to fix all of the air quality issues. Anyone else air quality? Yeah. Oh yeah, air quality. So they kind of think that we're there to fix everything, and although sometimes yes, sometimes it takes more than the 30 seconds to 45 seconds they expect it to be done in. What our parents think we do, I don't know about you, but I think my family is still like, yes, you have fun with that social event, that pizza party, that senior RA mentality that they kind of still think we're doing. And then what we actually do is balance all of the things, right? So kind of between here and between here, but also trying to get these few things done. So this is just like a fun meme to kind of start off the presentation. But now we want to throw it to you. So those groups that Michael broke you up into, you don't have to merge across the aisles. You can stay up in your own spaces. But we want this front group. So group number 1, what do you feel like entry-level professionals view or expect from mid-level managers? So as an entry-level professional, what do you think they view or what do you think they expect from mid-level managers? Whether when you were an entry-level professional or what you think entry-level professionals now think. For group number 2, what do you feel like senior-level professionals think or expect from mid-level managers, whether it be in your own experience or just some things that you can kind of think of? And then that third group, what do you think mid-level managers think or expect from mid-level managers, those day-to-day responsibilities? So talk in your groups. You can break up into smaller groups in your areas if needed, but we'll give you just about 5 minutes to do that, and then we'll share back out. Just trying to make sure I realize we're still on microphones. There's a lot of people here. Amazing. So did I. Well, thanks for coming to support me.
I'm just gonna stand in the back.
Is there a spot that's not taken?
There are. I'm just not sure yet.
Like this one? Can I take it?
I think so.
Really have this expectation that if a hall director left mid-year, that even though the assistant directors will serve on like the emergency rooms, that we would also serve on the hall director. There was a lot where it was like, when you have a desk assistant not show up, you're not going to sit. If you have an RA lead, I don't make you serve on the RA lead. Why would you expect that I would serve on the hall director when there's 10 of you, and there's 4 of us, you're not already on this. So I think
Want me to wrap it up? All right, so go ahead and finish your thoughts, and then we'll bring it back as a group.
sorry, I didn't realize. I made us introduce me.
You're fine, no worries.
Well, that's good. You'll have plenty more time to talk too, so. So anyone from the entry-level perspective want to share, or the group one want to share some of what you talked about, besides introductions? Sure.
I can share. So just want to thank you for this slide. I had to snap this into my fellow lady. So for me, I think what I'm experiencing with new professionals is this, so if we're in a resident meeting, we're announcing a change or this direction or whatever, this expectation that you are going to share everything with the exceptions and then you get the questions after the change and it's like, okay, well that's an exception and they want you to set an expectation for the exception. And it's like, no, we're not going to do that right now. If we relocate someone to a safe space and you think a friend needs to come with them, that's not allowed. But if you want to advocate for that, talk to the person on call in that moment, right? So I think there's this, for me, okay, you need to have the answers and you need to have the answer right now,
Anyone else relate to that? Thank you. Thank you for sharing. Anyone else from the first group? Or from the other groups that want to comment on expectations from the entry-level perspective of a mid-level manager?
I think that's what we talked about in our group is just, I think there's just a level of expectation that and I think something that we expect of ourselves too, is to be able to give good leadership and give good direction, set some good structure. So basically have all the answers. So I would echo that too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yes.
I think one thing that I've been surprised by is that entry levels and RAs don't see themselves always as a part of the department. So they're always like, well, HRL does this. And so once they get to mid-level up, they think it's like something being done unto them. When the reality is that there's a largest percentage of our department and probably have the most influence on culture, but they see like mid-level management as the threshold of culture creators. And if we can't like manage that culture and being situated between them and then decisions that are being made above us, I think that like that is a place in which I've seen a lot of pressure and frustration from the expectation of entry level.
Sure. Yeah, that's the they, meaning the department. And you're like, that's us. Right? Yeah, thank you. All right, what about that second group, the senior level housing officers? What do you feel like are senior level housing officers, some expectations of mid-level managers?
We were just saying that it's kind of expected for us to know all the things of the department, of our area, what's going on at a moment of notice. So, what's the update on this vaccine report? Well, which one? So it's just kind of like being up to date on every email, everything, every incident. So kind of like, we talked about the jack of all trades, but yeah.
Absolutely. I'm assuming people relate to that by the mm-hms.
A lot of times they'll call me on email that I don't need at this specific moment. And then like months later, or
Yeah.
Be at the very bottom.
Yep, being copied on.
I think something from my own experience that I'll share with this group is communication is hard. I think we joke about that and we talk about it with our entry-level professionals, and I think we remind ourselves when we get to the mid-level, and then we have to remind ourselves that it's like, oh no, that expectation still applies. Like, it's hard at all levels. And there's a lot of different levels. And so as we think bigger picture, that's something that I know for myself, I was encouraged to consider is when you move up, you gotta think bigger. You gotta think from like that 3,000 foot level and then be able to drill down to that like 1 inch level. And I'm like, well, okay, cool, I can do that. I know what I'm doing. Yeah, not as easy as it sounds. Definitely not as easy as, some even make it look. Like, I admire some people and I'm like, I don't know how you do this, and I wanna be on your level. But I'm not there yet, not always.
Other thoughts? Yes.
I think to go off the communication, there's also the piece on like what needs to be communicated to your senior level, and like sometimes they're asking for a lot of details, and what you really need to get them is the most effective report. But both of you are having a hard time figuring out which report that's going to be that allows them to take it to upper administration, and that takes a lot of knowing your stuff, but also knowing what they're going to be asking for before they even ask for it.
Yeah, that's a big piece, right? Absolutely. Yes.
Jumping off of that, when your senior level professional wants you to, because they're going to a meeting that you kind of are the content expert for, and they need the details that you know, trying to realize, okay, how do I provide that in like a one-pager bite-sized document so that they're going to be able to represent my area well, so that we're going to get the resources that we need. And so it's an interesting piece because it is really managing from the middle of making sure that the work's getting done, but then also making sure that the resources are there in order to get the work done.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a cycle. Did you want to add something too?
Yeah, I think the other piece of the communication, not just only filtering up, but being able to filter down as well. And like, some of that is not always explicitly, okay, we have this senior staff meeting, and you don't tell the entry-level staff this, but you can't communicate these pieces. And sometimes it's like, you just intrinsically need to know what stuff is and is not appropriate to communicate to student staff versus the grad versus your entry-level staff. Please don't mess this up.
And you're on a team that's doing that also.
Right, so almost
Right.
you need to say the same thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. What about our last group? So what do mid-level managers expect of themselves? Yes.
And I mean, this sticks out for me is, I'm looking for my peers, especially if we have kind of shared responsibilities, that you hope that they're going to meet you kind of at a similar level for something. So what is your culture collectively as a group of assistant or associate or area coordinators or whatever your role is going to be about, like answering their personal phone, and is there a certain amount of trust and privilege that comes with like the culture you're waiting for someone who's at that same place or not, because otherwise you get this uneven field and people quickly will learn who will respond and who will not. And that's a not fun position to be in. And I know I won't be able to get a hold of this person, so I called you, even though you're probably not the person I actually need to call.
Sure. Yeah, it kind of goes back off of what you were just saying in terms of the consistencies between areas, and how do you balance intrinsic knowledge in all different areas with multiple different people. On an AD team, it could be 1, 2 people, or 5, 6, 7, 8 people. Absolutely. Did you raise your hand back there? Yes.
I think it ties into the expectation that my peers are doing their job and doing it well to the best of their ability. And if they can't, they can communicate. There are some things that are impacting their ability to do their work, because our teams expect for us to be the knower of all the things. And if you don't know the things, or you're unwilling to know the things or do the things, then they're going to come after me, right? And I have all of these other pieces that I have to do in order to do my job effectively. So someone's going to literally do their job.
Yeah, I think something that was surprising for me as I transitioned to the mid-level was that team building is still just as critical at this level. I think when I kind of transitioned in, there wasn't a lot of that team focus on team building, but I feel like at this level, it was even more critical to be in tune with my peers. Again, based on that, I need to know how you're operating so that we can ask the right questions, so we are all on the same page, because some people can run 100 miles a minute in this direction, some people are in this direction. They're both the right direction, but different directions. And so that's been something that's been really interesting for me to kind of take a step back and learn, is that team building is critical. Because like as you're mentioning, when there's a limited number of us to be looked at or looked upon, then it's even easier to see those differences and see those inconsistencies. Absolutely. Awesome. Well, thank you all for sharing. I mean, there's a lot of shared experiences around the room, so hopefully these will kind of progress throughout the presentation. Oh, this is not you have the slide clicker.
Oh, there it goes. All right, cool. I was like, oh no, technology has failed me again. All right, so thank you all for participating again. And we know that the experiences that Kaila and I are sharing, as well as the experiences around the room, there are many shared experiences, but that's also not to say that everything about being mid-level is always difficult, always hard, it's always negative. That was never our goal in looking at this presentation, nor was it to say being a mid-level manager is always fantastic and great. I think the word alone, mid-management, and some of you around the room really struck on it, is that you are balancing not only the people above you, but you're balancing the people below you. And we're in a prime position where we really can be exceptional leaders for our department because we're helping cultivate the staff, the student staff, the entry-level staff to make sure that they're developing our culture and they're living our culture as well through how we supervise them, how we advise them, how we engage and encourage them to be involved in organizations such as SEAHO. But at the same time, we also have to recognize the needs of those above us because they're often pulled to higher needs through the university. And so making sure that we are on our game as we look at, all right, well, how am I communicating this up and how am I being the most effective person I can be so that I'm never putting somebody in a position where they don't know what I'm doing, but they don't have to know my every single move, but they never have to wonder what, at the end of the day, I'm accomplishing what they've set out for me. So when we thought about the meme activity, when we thought about why we wanted to come to this presentation, we looked at a lot of these questions and this idea of expectation versus reality. I think we all drive ourselves into these positions, and there's a reason we sought out a mid-level position. None of us are just like, yeah, I was okay at entry level, and now I want to put myself under even more pressure to lead an even larger group. Maybe that is your experience. I don't know. Maybe you're just like, yeah, that's me. Okay. But I think for the most part, at least for myself, I was looking at when I was making the jump, I've done a lot in my role now. And what do I want to give back to the profession? What do I want to continue to do? And how do I want to shape the professionals that are coming after me? And how do I focus on really leading? And how do I really make change within an organization? Because how do I want to prime myself to be in that position? And so those were some of the questions that I asked. But the reality is, yeah, I got to focus on the crucial elements. And so these were the questions that really guided us, was what brought us or is moving us into the mid-level? And we want you to consider this throughout the presentation. So quick show of hands, who is currently a mid-level professional? Okay, most people in the room, which is what we were hoping to see. Is there anybody in the room who's anticipating or getting ready to make that jump into the mid-level? All right, welcome. We are really excited to have you all here too, I promise you. And so that was one of the big things, was what guided us there? And for each of us, it's different. We all have an individual story. The expectations that we had for these positions when we started. I think I came in thinking, all right, I'm gonna supervise, I'm gonna do this. I'll be very honest, my job has quickly turned into facilities 101 in ways I never imagined, and I've had to reshift my efforts and my focus, but that's my position. Some of you indicated you have collateral assignments. You may be focusing a lot more on the collateral assignments because of the nature of what those projects are asking you. And so are there moments where you feel like, that's not what I was brought here to do. I was brought here to supervise, I was brought here to educate, and I'm not able to do that the way that I thought I was. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just how do we find our way through that? I think that's the question that we have to remind ourselves. And that can get lost very quickly. What have been the challenges or struggles that we've encountered? I think that goes without saying. It's not all sunshines and rainbows every single day. But for myself, and I think when Kaila and even Mike, when we were discussing this, it's, well, what are the strategies that we're using to move through this? I think that's the important thing. And then finally, what have been your successes? That is the last question here, but that is the most crucial question on this sheet of paper or on this slide, because we have to look at those small victories, and I'll go into this in a few minutes with Essentialism, but those are the pieces that we have to build upon. We can't push this huge initiative through all the time because that is a big boulder and that's gonna take a lot of work and you're gonna have a lot of barriers to get some big idea through. But how do you start setting up building blocks now to get those small things? And then how are you celebrating those? Every victory is a victory, whether it's teeny tiny, like 1 inch, or it's 15 feet tall. But when we lose sight of that, it gets really hard to continue to motivate ourselves and also to motivate our staffs that we're supervising. And then also, how are we celebrating the victories of our department as a whole when we are helping progress what the culture is and what the department is doing? Because we are. Let's never lose sight of that.
Yeah, sorry, quick question. Does anyone have a recent success they want to share with the group? Anything that, whether it's a big success, a small success, that was like a, yes. Anyone empty their inbox before SEAHO? Not me.
Wait, we got a hand.
Certainly.
We've got a hand. That
Certainly
is a
not.
victory.
Yeah, so yes, congratulations. I'll let you. See, but those are victories things. Yeah, do you have one?
I had been out of res life for about 6-7 years, but coming back I found I really do like working with and supervising and mentoring new hall directors. I used to really enjoy mentoring students, and so I guess there's that similar. And like just before this, I just presented with one of my hall directors, and it was his very first professional conference presentation.
Oh, that's
So
awesome.
the fact that I got to be part of that, and that I asked him to do that, and did that, like those things are very special to me, because I remember who I first presented with, and things like that, and so, but I really do like supervising new professionals.
That's awesome. Thank you. Thanks for sharing, and congratulations on presenting program. I didn't mean to steal the thunder away. I just really wanted to get
Again,
excited.
Case in point. I promise you, it's all important. So I know there was one hand that raised their hand. So again, I'm going to boil Essentialism down. If you have not read the book, I promise you, it's a great read. Okay, I got another hand. It is a great read. It doesn't take a lot, but there's a lot of really big picture concepts. And so for the point of this, why we wanted to discuss it is, we've talked in this room how many things are coming at us at multiple miles an hour, all these different speeds, but really you have to focus on yourself first. That's a lesson that I've really come to learn in this position, and so that's also something that's been encouraged to me by other peers, other supervisors that I have, and even mentors in this field, is you gotta focus on yourself before you can start building outside of you. And so with Essentialism, really essentially what it boils down to is there's these 4 parts. There's the essence. Why are we living this essentialist life? And essentialism is not minimalism. We're not saying, okay, there can only be one thing on your desk. If it doesn't spark joy, get rid of it. That's also a great philosophy. But it's that idea of, okay, why are we doing this? Why do I need to focus on these individual items? Why do I need to focus on what is crucial in my work and what is not? Like, what has brought me here? Exploring that. Okay, what are the ways in which I can do that? How can I figure out what is an actual priority versus what is something that needs to get done, but it doesn't need to be the core of what I'm doing now? Eliminating, yes, I wish we could eliminate every single possible barrier, sidestep. I'm not gonna lie, in my life, if I didn't have to work with parents as much on really weird facilities issues, like they really like to get involved in the height of my student's bed is not high enough. What? Okay, cool. But how are we working through those barriers? How are we making sure that those blocks that are going to get in our way from once we've identified, okay, this is what I need to do to move forward, how do I take those things out of the equation? And then finally, how do I actually execute this? How do I actually get done what needs to be done? And how do I take those small victories and start building towards an even bigger trajectory? Okay, there's a fantastic image in the book that illustrates that. Priorities. We talk a lot about, well, these are my priorities in work. These are my priorities as a professional. These are my priorities as an assistant director or as a mid-level professional, whatever your title is. But at the end of the day, priorities is kind of a tricky word because we can have a heck of a lot of priorities, but at the same time, priority is singular. If I've got like my main priority, that means that's the main focus that I should be going on. Like there really shouldn't be a whole lot. And so in the book, they talk about this of how do you sort through that? How do you make meaning of that? Because yeah, we're not saying that nothing is important, like you've gotta only focus on one thing, but how do you really find, okay, what is the priority today so I can focus on it and move to the next priority once I've accomplished that first one, okay? It's taking those small incremental steps. The graceful no. This is something else that we really have to think about, and this is something that I've actually had to start practicing. Now, I don't do it very well, but McEwen, who wrote Essentialism, talks about this idea and cites a lot of examples of the graceful no, that it's sometimes you have to say no to an opportunity. Sometimes you may have to say no to taking on another project. Sometimes you may have to say no to a leadership experience within your department. I think we've all heard the rule of exceptional work, great work gets rewarded with more work. Yeah, some of you are like, yeah. So The thing is, though, if we're not in a position of ourselves that we can take that on, because if we start looking and if we're taking on those additional responsibilities and then other responsibilities, our priority starts to suffer because of that, are we doing any good to ourselves? Are we doing any good to our department and the students and staff that we supervise? That's a hard one, and that's not an easy one to practice, and it's a lot easier said than done, but I can speak from experience. I have had to say no to some things that I've wanted to do within SEAHO. I've had to say no to some things that I wanted to do within my department, or tell myself, you shouldn't pursue that right now. Even though you are fully capable of handling that project, even though you're fully capable of going out and doing that piece for somebody else, you need to focus on what you were here to do, because that is not where it needs to be for yourself. That's not where you maybe think it needs to be for your department.
Yeah, and I think the no kind of transitions with you as you transition to mid-level management, right? The no as an entry-level professional is a lot of times about your self-care and your wellness. The no, saying no as a mid-level professional is about everybody else's and yours, right? So you have to protect your energy to do your best for those you supervise, and you have to protect your energy to fulfill the requests from those that are supervising you or requesting it from you. But also understanding and acknowledging that there are some things you can't say no to. And so how do you recognize those pieces and then re-strategize and reprioritize and have the conversations, right? You know, your supervisor may be able to have those conversations, but when your executive director or your VP requests something, how do you kind of navigate that conversation? Have you built that rapport with your supervisor where you can have those conversations so you know the expectations? But then again, constantly remembering that your energy isn't just about you, right? It's mostly about you, and you are important. We are important. Our energy is important for us. But we have to be able to give to those we supervise. And you know, my favorite quote that I have in my office is, "You can't pour from an empty cup." And I know we can say that all day long, and it's tough. And it is tough, but we have to kind of be thinking about our role as mid-level management and what that looks like for those we supervise, and how we're kind of allocating our time that way.
And so this last part here, the buffering, subtracting, progress, flow, and focus, this actually comes out of that last part of the overall scheme of Essentialism, which is executing. And so buffering, how are we setting up buffers for our staff, for ourselves, not always protecting somebody and saying, I don't want you to work on that because I don't need you to, but how are we setting up systems so that, okay, if I need extra time, I can do it. If I need additional resources and support, I've got that from the onset before I ever need to rely on those, because maybe I won't need them, so I don't have to ask for it later on. Subtracting, getting rid of those little tiny variables that we can and we know we have the ability to, so that we can put our efforts where we need to. Progress, like I said earlier, those small victories add up, and those small victories, I think even at this level for myself, I've learned very quickly, I have to count all those small victories that I can make in my area for myself, because then I figure out, how do I build upon that? How do I start small and build bigger? Because I will be real honest, the area of my campus, I work with a lot of partners for my facilities. I cannot push a huge initiative through because I have so many more levels, and it gets very political very quickly about the answers and responses I can receive back from them about whether or not they're even willing to hear me out, and then vice versa. So progress, count those small victories. The flow, the habits that we create. How are we making sure that we're creating healthy habits for our work, but also for ourselves? I think we also need to make sure that we're never forgetting, like Kaila said, how we're being mindful of ourselves, our personal well-being, our care, because we talk a big game about how we need to focus on that for our entry-level professionals, and then I think we forget it because when we get to the mid-level, it's like, oh, I got this now. I know how to do it for myself, and we're not always going to be the experts, and it's even more crucial now because we have a lot of other people who are working with us. And then finally, the focus. How are you actually putting all these pieces into play?
Yeah, and one thing to share, you know, just one of my own experiences I think was kind of an aha moment for me just a few months ago was the Kauai internship process. Anyone familiar? Most people. So I was transitioned my role back in August, so still fairly new, and was kind of like, okay, I need to do all my jobs well, and I need to make sure my entry-level professionals are doing their job well, and so that kind of caused me to not delegate as much as I probably should have. And it wasn't until I had one of my entry-level staff come to me and say, you know, they were going to be helping with the Kauai intern review. And I didn't know what I was doing. I was brand new to reviewing Kauai interns. And I was like, all right, I've got 642 interns to review, so I'm going to get, you know, some snacks and get started. And they came to me and they're like, well, how can I help? And I was like, you know, that's okay. You've done your part. You know, it's already 4:45, and I'm just getting to this now. It's fine, like, but I really appreciate your help. And she was like, but you have a lot to do too. And I was like, I deflect a lot. I'm like, we all have a lot to do. And she's like, yes, but I know you have a lot to do, and I want to help with this. And I've set aside some time tomorrow to help with this. How can I help? And I was like, oh my gosh, that should have been my job to talk to you about that. And so in that moment, we were talking through that and realizing that we don't have to, mid-level manager, doesn't have to shoulder all the burden, right? They can kind of take a step up in different areas, and I was trying so hard to protect them, her and her energy and her time and wellness. And she was like, I want to do this, I'm excited about this. And I said, well, great, we can flex your time next week. We can adjust this differently, and how can we talk through that? So that was something that was really an aha moment for me to share. Now this is something I'm really excited about, talking about task management. So I wanted to share, I was sharing with Michael and Mike about a strategy for success, and then we can turn to you all to share. This is based on a quadrant method that I was trying to Google the name of what it actually is, and I couldn't find it. But TBD, I'll tell you later. But I actually have this in my wall. So this is on my wall, and it's a giant.
We've got a name. It's Stephen Covey.
Thanks, Lindsay. Lindsay is my supervisor back at FGC when we learned this about time management. And so it looked a little bit different. The quadrants are a little different. I transitioned it to be more task management, but I literally have those giant sticky notes. I have them on my wall in these 4 categories, and I have the little signs on the edge. And I have Post-it notes for every task I work on. And so I work with professional staff, student staff recruitment selection, also NRHH, RHA, and then supervision. And so I have a key on the side with different color codes. So this color code is long-term goals for student staff selection, and then I have short-term goals for student staff. I have a lot of colored sticky notes. And then I have leadership and everything like that. And I just take some time. I should take it once a week. It's kind of once every other week when I can. But I take time and I write the tasks down on it. So grad selection, I write, marketing's on there. I write application questions, interview questions, and then I put them in the quadrants that are applicable. So there's some things for me that I really want to work on, some big projects, some long-term goals. I want to create an advisor manual for our area council advisors. That's something that's really important to me, but I can't do that tomorrow. And so it's not necessarily not important, but it's not urgent. Right? And it is important to me, but the priority of things I need to get done is not so right now. And so it's in this quadrant. But the things I have to get done, so what always is permanently up there in urgent, high priority, it just says conduct with some exclamation marks and some underscores, and it's just right up there. Also emails, I just do those to remind myself I have to do that. So I put those up there. But then I've got some other things. So I'm looking at, okay, grad recruitment. So the marketing, that's high priority and urgent because I got to get that out. But reviewing the questions for when they come to campus to do that second round interview, that's also kind of urgent because it has to happen, but it's low priority right now. And then with the facilities issues and the things that pop up. And so I've been putting things like this, and then I have a task, I recently added a task completed category, and it's only this big, but man, it is filled with some stickies. And sometimes I'll be like, oh, hold on, and I write something and I put it right there. I'm like, forgot to add that, but I did it. And so I have that to kind of remind myself. And so this is something I do, and my grad student and I work on this. So when I have a grad student that works specifically with my areas, and so sometimes we'll come together and we'll take a look at what do we need to work on, what are things that we can do together, and sometimes she'll literally take a sticky and go work on it and then bring it back, and she can put it up there. And so this has been something that it takes some time to kind of organize, but when I'm realizing that I have so many different hats to wear in my role, this is very visually helpful. Plus, my supervisor, my peers walk in, they get excited on the days when my top left quadrant isn't as packed. They're like, oh, wow, good for you. And I'm like, oh, I haven't updated in a while, but thank you. But then there's days where I kind of move things around as they see fit. So if you want to talk more about this, we can definitely do that later. Are there any other strategies, though, that someone has used they want to share? Yeah, absolutely.
If you haven't read Design Your Life yet, I'd recommend it. We're
Design Your
reading it
Life.
as a department, and it's about using design thinking skills to improve
Yes.
how you spend your time.
Cool.
And it's really helpful. So it has different activities throughout if you get the workbook, which are honestly would be very helpful to do with RAs. But you set kind of what your dashboards are. So you have play, love, work, and health, and you set where you are at the beginning
That's cool.
of it, and you do and dabble in little things to try to increase your dashboard of fullness and satisfaction in those areas. But it also
Cool.
has you do a lot of time inventories of what's giving you energy and what you're engaged in, so that you can try to take out as many things as possible that aren't giving you energy and that you're not engaged in as much as possible, and kind of streamlining the way that you're using your time.
Cool. That's
So
interesting.
I found that helpful because I think I've to this point, I think I was thinking to myself, in our work is a high priority urgent thing always all of our emails, and I think I've actually let go of feeling like some of my emails are not urgent, are at low priority when being available to a student that has
Yeah.
And that people can wait for answers, or they can do a good job at finding colleagues who also know the answer.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Thank you. Anyone more want to share? Thanks. Yeah, Layla.
Something that
Or
one of
you?
my colleagues who's a mid-level manager does is she uses Trello, and so it's kind of like this, and so she uses Trello to make different, like her different priorities for her different things, so conduct, staff selection, recruitment, things like that, and then you can make other lists, and so if you want to make your urgent, high priority things, and then it's kind of like that very satisfying, like when you can drag it to the completed, and so you can kind of visually see what you need to do, and then what you've completed, but it's not necessarily like sticky note form, but it still is that visual reference electronically.
Yeah, so Trello is what she said. It's if you're not familiar, like if we were to pull it up here, it's got a bunch of cards and lists, and you can kind of electronically move things. So it's kind of like sticky notes, but electronically. So awesome. And it's free. You can get it on your phone too. My student leaders use that. That's how they manage their things too.
I think we do want to move on because we do want to be mindful of time, but one of the reasons we share this is because there's a lot of knowledge in the room. We want to make sure that we're supplementing that, and we're going to give you all a resource as well that we encourage you to speak to those around you about too. Supervision, it's the biggest thing. We're not going to go really in-depth in radical candor, but at the same time, once we've worked on ourselves, then we can really start working on how are we working with others. And so, again, defining those strong leadership and supervision for your supervisees. What does that mean to you? But being very clear, very open, and transparent with your peers, with your supervisees of what is it you need from me? I think what we think works really well for one group, we have to remind ourselves it's not always going to work. That question gets asked all the time. How do you supervise this group versus this group? And it's like, well, it's all individual. It's like, yes, and. So one thing that I think we always have to remind ourselves is those expectations. Are we sticking to those expectations? I have my staff expectations on my desk, so I always remember what is it they need from me every single day. Defining strong leadership and realistic expectations for your supervisor or your supervisors. As much as we talk about the expectations we have of our team, we also have to ask, what is it that you need of me? And am I meeting those expectations? And how do I have those regular check-ins? Building that strong relationship is crucial because you need to always be aware of what's going on with yourself and others. And then finally, clear and concise, understanding your needs and defining what that looks like for those around you and your role. Again, how am I communicating this out? Because if I'm like sitting here in my head processing, this is what I need for supervision, this is what I need you to do as my supervisees, but I'm not telling you any of that, that does you absolutely no good. And it doesn't do your team any good either. So I know we kind of went through this quickly, but at the same time, Radical Candor, we pulled some of those pieces out because at the end of the day, there's some good lessons from there, and there's some good takeaways from that book. And if you haven't read it, again, like I said, I think it was the Hawaii book list, or book club a few years ago. There are a lot of good pieces from it. So some of those pieces that we need to remember when we're talking about it is, how do we solicit criticism? Challenging directly is a two-way street. As much as I'm going to give you feedback and when people ask me for feedback on a project, I need to be willing to take that myself. I need to remember to be humble as a supervisor because there's no way I can move through and say, I know exactly what I'm doing. I don't. Be very honest with this room. I don't know what I'm doing all the time. Giving that criticism, which is on there twice somehow. Okay, so feedback tip, giving criticism. So eliminating the phrase, don't take it personally, and then also, it's not mean, it's clear. You can still be mean as a supervisor. Clarity is a whole other ballgame that we have to learn in our lives. And then finally, that idea of you can give the criticism, you can solicit the criticism, but then you also eventually have to give praise and giving context, celebrating, and actually making sure folks know where their successes are. As much as we want to know where we're succeeding, others need to know too. So, survival of the middlest. Kaila, you want to talk about this real quick?
Thanks. It's funny, right? We thought it was funny. So this is where we really want to, and that's why we want to kind of get through to this part. We really want to be able to turn this over to have this conversation about how do we make the most and progress through this, right? So we wanted to acknowledge the things that exist, the realities, the expectations, but we're here and we're in it, and at least for me, I do love it. And so, right, how do we then do the best we can do for ourselves and for those around us? And so the survival of the middlest, sorry, I still laugh when I read it. It's been a long time. These are some things that the three of us, so Michael and myself, came up with as things that we feel are helpful, but we want to bring you back to your groups again to talk through before you move. We want to bring you back to your groups to talk through that. What are some ways, and you can read our thoughts, but what are some ways that you kind of motivate yourself to make through? What are some tangible action steps that you can do when you get back to your home campus to improve your work and your work life for yourself? And so we went back and forth on handouts. We were like, we want to be sustainable, but we also realized that like sometimes when you go to SEAHO, you're like, yes, great presentation. That really made me think. All right, lunch, flight home, emails, work, right? There's a lot of times that then you kind of move past it. And so we talked about the fact that a lot of times when we have to physically write something down, it helps us actually commit to doing something and hold ourselves accountable. And then the other step on that worksheet you'll have, and I'm sorry, we didn't expect that many people, so if we didn't get to you in the back, we can either send it to you or you can take notes on kind of your goals for yourself to kind of make it through, survive, and manage yourself and manage the middle. But the last piece down there we felt is the most important, and so we want you to take the time today when you talk with your group to actually find somebody that can kind of be your accountability buddy of sorts, right? So someone in this room, that was our goal, was someone in this room that you're talking to, and it could be someone else at this conference, but we really want you, or someone else that you know back home, but we really want you to find someone, particularly not someone you see every day, right? Because they can hold you accountable in different ways, but someone that can check in on you. Maybe you set aside once a month where you just kind of send an email and say like, hey, how are you doing in these things? Like there was this very specific task you were talking about that you wanted to accomplish. How are you doing with that? And so our goal is really to help mid-level managers create a supportive community, because we talked about there's a lot of communities that exist, knowledge communities for entry-level professionals, senior level housing officers, but from like 4 years of experience to SHO is like your whole career basically. And so where is the kind of support there? So I want you to get back into your groups and hopefully try to work through this worksheet. And then we will close out with just one last slide. So we'll give you probably about 5 minutes to do this, and then we'll wrap up.
And you can work with the person next to you as well,
Yeah.
so if that's easier. Make friends.
I was like, we're doing great on time, we're doing great on time. And then when you said that, I was like, oh, but I think that's good. I think we... They laughed at the survival of middleists, and really that's all I cared about in this presentation. I'm just kidding. I think it's going well. Do you want to lead? How do you want to do this one? Talking about their plans they made, right? Kind of what you talked about out there.
Yeah, I think we talk about like, I think we go through this, and so I think what we do is we just kind of say like, this is not, I can do it.
Okay.
Sorry, I wanted to be very mindful of time. We ran over.
I know we talked about wanting to, create some sort of community, but I don't think we talked about how to flush that forward, right? I mean, we're not going to collect email addresses and create a list here. That would be a little bit much. I'm excited. I hope that this is helping people. One slide left, so we only need like, 3 minutes to really wrap it up in. we'll give it another minute. I feel like this is the best part, them talking to each other. And I can tell by their facial expressions, people are very into the conversations. All right, so give him a minute. All right. All right, hopefully you're having some good conversation. So I could tell by the facial reactions and the hand gestures and the things that hopefully you're having some good conversation. So I we strongly encourage you, this is the time to exchange that business card or just write down your email or connect with someone. Make that connection that you really do commit to sustaining beyond SEAHO so that you do have that support, you do have that network. We talked about how do we go forth and create some sort of knowledge community or something, but until that's done, that's on us to kind of create these pockets for ourselves. And so we really hope you take the time to connect with someone else today.
And so the last thing that we just wanted to
Right thing.
Talk about is obviously the title of this presentation, The Real Talk. And so we've mentioned a lot of things. We have discussed a lot of our own experiences and some things that we've kind of done to make sure that we're moving through and we're succeeding and thriving in those pieces, because it's not always easy. It's really hard to thrive. And there are a lot of outside forces that are going to come in and are going to either derail you because you've got the project that needs to be done and you've got staff that have needs and demands, you've got students that have those as well. But then even bigger scope than that, sometimes just the environment you're living in just makes it hard to be who you are as your most successful self. And so we don't want to end this on a sour note from the standpoint of saying, all right, well, we set you up for success and now all of a sudden we're going to bring you back down. But it's the reality of this is hard work. I think we can all agree on that. Whether you're starting off or you've been in this role for a few years, there's so much wealth and knowledge at this level of the game, and it's really hard sometimes to get ourselves out of those bubbles and to recognize that, no, the work we are doing is important, the work we are doing is hard, and sometimes we just have to be real with ourselves and we have to level with ourselves on so many different things. I mentioned earlier that I'm very conscious of my identity when I approached work because I'm working with a student group where I've been at predominantly white institutions, and as a supervisor, it wasn't hard for me to connect with my staff because they shared a lot of those identities, and vice versa. Whereas now, I'm finding myself in a much more diverse environment, and you're like, okay, diversity, yeah, that should be assumed. But sometimes we're in those bubbles and those pockets where when we start our careers, even as knowledgeable as we can be through the work we do in our coursework, in our degree programs, in experience and outside obligations, we aren't always exposed to those groups, and we have to be conscious of, well, how do I show up in these spaces? Because before I was an entry level, and sometimes I wasn't always seated at the table just because that wasn't a table I was ever going to be invited to by name of my position. But now sometimes I might find myself at a seat at the table because of who I am, and some people may not because of the identities they have. So how am I continuing what it is I'm doing at the middle? Is I'm pushing people forward at all levels. I'm helping everybody succeed and reminding myself that that is a crucial role that I need to always remember and I need to keep at the core of my work and my values, because it's not just about getting the job done. It's about making sure that everybody's on that train and everybody's moving forward and we're all succeeding and we're all pushing forward. That's something that's incredibly important. And so we wanted to remind you all of just some last minute facts and some of the things that we considered, but again, it's understanding how our identities play into those pieces, because we can do all this work to set ourselves up for success, but if we are not conscious of who we are at our core, and if we don't remind ourselves, it's not always about, okay, well, how am I against you, but it's, I need to remind myself of who I am and why I came into this work and how I want to thrive and how I'm going to push others to thrive and succeed around me. Navigating ways to advocate for yourself and others. A lesson that I learned when I attended Relay years ago. My faculty cluster was like, you need to advocate for yourself more. And I'm like, I am. And she goes, no, you need to put yourself in that space and make sure that you are doing that. And if you can't, you need to figure out how you get someone on your side, how you form an ally to do it for you. How are we doing that for ourselves, and how are we being allies for others? That's just as important, and that is crucial as well in this work. Acknowledging and discussing bias and privilege within supervision. It happens. And we need to call it out for what it is. And we need to always, always be open to having that conversation. We talked about radical candor and supervision. You may need to take that criticism. You may need to take that feedback. But if you aren't creating a space where others can approach you or they don't feel comfortable approaching you, then all the work you're doing isn't going to matter if you're not able to help someone else succeed. And then finally, finding your support group. This was our hope and dream from this presentation, because as we were going through this and trying to figure out why are we presenting, we didn't want to tell a somber story of this has been all the challenges we've had in supervision. We didn't want to sugarcoat it and say that it's great, you should be a mid-level manager. We need those messages, we do, because we need the realities and we need the hope in the work that we're doing. But at the end of the day, what we wanted to accomplish through this presentation was bringing folks together who are sharing this identity of a mid-level manager and helping us come together and find ways that we can support one another and we can make sure that we are focusing on the core of our work and how we are excelling and thriving as our own individuals in this work. Because it's tough. It is a real tough world. And I think we all know that, but at the same time, when we start thinking about those victories we've had and reminding ourselves of those, it makes it a lot easier to say, no, I am in the right place, and this is where I can make the most difference, because that's what we are here to do, is we're here to push everybody at all levels, because we're right in the center of it.
Yeah, no, so the last thing, like I said, just really hope you do take the time, whether it's in this session, when you're traveling back home, when you get back home, to find somebody that you can connect with. Maybe somebody that you don't normally connect with, you don't talk to your day-to-day with, somebody else that you can kind of hold you accountable, that you really create some sort of goals or things for yourself that you can focus on, you know, realistic goals or lofty goals, both. And so hope that you leave here that today. Michael and I, our business cards are up here, but so feel free to come take one or come talk to us. And if you didn't get a handout or want to copy the presentation, come let us know. But thank you for taking the time with us today, and hopefully you take something back from this presentation. And I think you speak.